Hi folks, this is Jim at your Jiffy Customer Support Network. In this segment we're going to cover the proper procedure for changing the throttle control on the Jiffy PRO4 propane powered ice drill. Anytime that you're looking at doing repair work or replacing certain parts on the Jiffy model PRO4 propane powered ice drill, you're going to want to take note that there are two different generation PRO4 units, and depending on the repair or the replacement, you're going to want to make sure that you identify which generation PRO4 model that you have. If you're replacing the carburetor, or if you're replacing the propane fuel delivery system, or changing out the throttle control, these are specific ones that there are different steps to completing the procedure for those replacements. So you're going to want to make sure that you identify the unit that you have. The two generation models are shown in the video here. The first unit on the right is the first generation, and it's identified by noting the aluminum fuel line that attaches the carburetor to the regulator, shown here in the video. Again, that's the first generation PRO4 model. The second generation PRO4 is shown here on the left, and the first thing you'll note the absence of the aluminum fuel line, because the carburetor and the regulator are attached directly by this brass fitting. That's the major difference between the two models, but it does create specific differences in the steps taken in the procedure of replacing those particular parts. So you want to make sure you take note of that. Okay, the first step we're going to take in removing the throttle and cable assembly from the first generation Jiffy model PRO4 is to go ahead and remove the throttle lever from the operator's handle. Again, this is located on the spark plug side of the unit. We'll just use a medium-sized Phillips screwdriver and just back that retention screw out of the handle until the throttle control lever comes loose. Kind of set that away to the side. And then the next step we're going to take is go ahead and remove the air cleaner assembly by first removing the air cleaner cover, then the air filter foam element, and then go ahead and remove the air cleaner backplate using a 5/16 nut driver to remove the retention nuts. Get the next one off here. So we'll go ahead and remove the retention clamp right away. Then we'll slide the air cleaner backplate off. We'll want to disassemble the breather tube from the air cleaner backplate. And at the same time, I want to note that there is a gasket that goes between the air cleaner backplate and the carburetor. We want to make sure that that's in place. It's a grayish color gasket. And then the next thing, we'll remove the fuel line from the carburetor by loosening the brass nut here, and we'll move that fuel line back out of the way, which then allows us to remove the carburetor and the throttle control cable and assembly. The next step we're going to want to take is remove the throttle wire from the throttle lever on the carburetor using needle nose pliers. Just slightly open the throttle up there and just slide that cable out of that pivot post. Whoops. And then next we'll just go ahead and loosen up the throttle cable from the mounting bracket on the side of the carburetor. And we'll just turn that carburetor off the end of the control cable. To install the new throttle cable, first of all we'll go ahead and mount the threaded end of the throttle cable back into the bracket on the side of the carburetor just by spinning that on. And as you're turning that on, you're going to note that the threads on the end of the throttle cable start coming through the top of the bracket. And once you see like one thread come through the top of that bracket, we're going to want to go ahead and tighten up that retention nut, because that's the proper location for that assembly. Go ahead and tighten that up. And the next thing we'll want to do is go ahead and reattach the throttle wire back to the pivot post on the carburetor. One thing I'm going to note here is that if you look at the throttle wire, you're going to notice that there's a ball on the end of it. And the pivot post that it goes on, it fits in that slot, and on one end of that slot there's a wider opening that this ball fits down into. If you don't use that wider end, that ball is not going to fall down into place in that pivot post. So you want to make sure that that larger opening is in the upper position. We'll go ahead and open the throttle lever, put that back in place, get that back in there. Then we'll go ahead and remount the carburetor to the mounting studs. First, we want to make sure that the gasket between the carburetor adapter and the carburetor is in place. We'll slide the carburetor assembly back on. Then the next thing we'll do is go ahead and reattach the aluminum fuel line to the carburetor. Tighten that up, nice and snug. The next step we want to take is remount the air cleaner backplate back to the carburetor, making note that the gasket on the air cleaner backplate is in position. And we want to go ahead and reattach the breather tube to the air cleaner backplate, and go ahead and slide the air cleaner backplate over the mounting studs. Then we'll want to mount the retention clamp and go ahead and put the retention nuts back on. Go ahead and tighten those up. Nice and snug. We'll go ahead and replace the foam air filter element and then the air cleaner cover. And then last, we'll go ahead and remount the new throttle lever to the handle. All we'll do is line that up and just re-screw the retention screw back into the handle until it snugs up to the operator's control handle. Now that we have everything reassembled, the next thing we want to just double check is to make sure that the throttle lever on the carburetor functions properly with the throttle on the handle, to make sure everything works freely and everything. On the Generation 1 Jiffy Model Pro4 propane powered ice drill, anytime that you work on the propane fuel system, whether it be the fuel line that attaches the carburetor to the regulator, or the carburetor itself, or the fuel delivery system, which includes the regulator and the hose, once you have everything reassembled, you want to make sure that you perform what's called a leak test. A leak test is performed by using a water-soap mixture along with a brush that you brush over the various fittings after you've got it reassembled. And then if you see any bubbles form, that's evidence of a leak. And the thing you'll want to do is retighten those fittings that leak and then re-perform the leak test until you make sure you have no bubbles. And that basically concludes the proper procedure for changing out the throttle control on the Generation 1 Jiffy Model Pro4. If anyone has any questions or concerns regarding this procedure, Please feel free to visit us anytime at the 2 locations noted on the screen. I'd like to take this time to thank you for your continued support of Jiffy products and also the purchase of your Jiffy ice drill. Thanks and have a great day.